This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Lime Designs. If the name sounds familiar, that's because it's my design business and the work I do there helps make this podcast possible. If you love colorful and whimsical art prints, greeting cards, and journaling stickers, then head over to my Etsy shop for a delightful browse. Just search for Fine Lime, like the fruit, designs, all one word, on Etsy, or click the link in the show notes. And now, on with this week's episode. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and this week I am so happy to be welcoming one of my favorite people to the podcast. My guest this week is Tiffany Mayer, and she is an author, a journalist, and a freelance writer who you may know better online as Eating Niagara. And she is with me this week, and I'm so excited you're here today, Tiffany.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Yes, and we're going to be talking today. This episode came out of a conversation that Tiffany and I had a couple of months ago where she jokingly, I think, said to me, if you ever need a guest on the show who can talk about all the things not to do when you're a freelancer, I would be that guest.
Yes. Yeah, that would be me.
And I took her up on it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Not just Tiffany's mistakes, but we're going to be talking about mistakes in general to hopefully try and avoid. If you're a seasoned freelancer, probably some of the things we're going to be talking about today are things that you can definitely relate to. But if you are fairly new to working for yourself, there's a whole list of things that you just don't know about when you start out, and you realize very quickly that you are making some mistakes that need to be corrected. So we're going to be talking about all of those today. But before we do that, Tiffany, the first question I ask everybody who comes on the show is, did you consider yourself creative as a kid?
Yes, very, very much so. If the opposite of being creative, for example, is having a math mind, then I was definitely a creative kid. But I say that tongue in cheek. But anyway, I know that I was very creative. I was always drawn to write. I just remember from a very young age going to the library and being so captivated by the books on the shelf and the words on the page, and, taking out way more than I should have, and often racking up late fees too. Just like devouring them, but also sitting down with them next to me as though they were my muses and just writing and writing and writing. And I don't know if any of it made sense. I don't know if I spelled anything correctly, but that's just what I did. I just, I loved words. I loved writing. There was a time when, I was told I had a flair for the dramatic, and that was meant as a compliment, that I should have gone into the performing arts, but I was a little shy. So I think this is why writing has always appealed to me more than being out in the spotlight on a stage. So,
what's your earliest memory of writing? Like, is it something you did from a pretty much as soon as you could pick up a pen and form the alphabet, or?
Yeah, grade one. Like that's when I remember those memories of lugging home stacks of library books, including ones that were way too advanced for my reading level at that time, but bringing them home and even just being inspired by the titles of them and kind of using the titles as a writing prompt and just it was just like free writing, like what's encouraged in every sort of self-improvement or journaling kind of program that you get into today. It was just that kind of writing, and like I said, I don't even remember if it made any sense. I don't even remember if it was an actual story or just mumble jumble, but I was getting stuff down on a page and loving it while I was doing it. So it brought me a lot of joy. Yeah.
Do you still have any records of any of that work from when you were a kid?
And not from that age. I was raised by probably two of the most unsentimental people in the world. So I don't have that, but I do think I have a story still from grade 4, which I wrote about my dog, a Newfoundland. I made him a superhero. Probably not the most original idea, but it was chaptered and everything, and had pictures, and I think my mom hung on to that one for me, and it's somewhere in a box in my garage right now.
Oh, that's awesome! I hope you can find it one day.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So was being a writer something you knew you wanted to do basically from a very young age then? Is that where you had planned to go after high school?
Interestingly, the first job that I really wanted, when I was in elementary school, I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals so much. I still do love animals, but that was what I wanted to do. And then, in high school, that changed because I realized I didn't have that science and math mind that would be needed for that. And then, after not really being sure, and even thinking that I might like to be in the Air Force, because this was in the era of the Gulf War and all of that brouhaha, and I became an air cadet, but it didn't last long. And it pretty quickly after that, I was like, you know what? I read The Catcher in the Rye for an English class, and I thought, I want to write the sequel to The Catcher in the Rye.
Oh, that's so funny. I wanted to do the same thing. That's hilarious.
Oh my God. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And then, then it was like, okay, reality check. I need to earn a paycheck until I pen the next great Canadian/American novel. And that's when I thought of journalism. So yeah, and that kind of became what I fixated on, and that's been my goal, or was my goal, kind of around the age of 15 on. So
where did you go to school for journalism?
I went to the University of Regina, so I kind of took the scenic route to getting my journalism degree. I did my Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology first at the University of Alberta, which was a great degree to translate well in a journalism career, because anthropology is the study of man. Yep. Seeing man loosely to include everything. Yes, humans. I'm sure that's what they're going with now. And just like observing and chronicling and concepts of challenging ethnocentrism, learning how to ask questions. Like it was, and interviewing techniques, and so that really did translate well when I did enroll in the Bachelor of Journalism after degree program at the University of Regina, which I really loved Saskatchewan. I really loved U of A, and I really loved living in Saskatchewan afterwards. So
because you're actually from Ontario, and that's where you are now. So yeah, you've traveled around a bit to get to where you are today, and in there you have focused in on the food niche which has been really interesting. And I've always thought you are one of the most gifted food writers in the country when it comes to telling the stories of the people who produce our food.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
And,
thank you.
Well, no, I mean it. And we've had the opportunity to work together on a few projects that have been in that realm. What was it that drew you to writing about food? And because you write about it from so many different angles. You write about it from a journalism perspective, but you also write about it. You've written about it from a blogging perspective. You write about it as just somebody who loves food, and you freelance write about it. And what was it that drew you into food?
Yeah, honestly, I blame Saskatchewan. I think, I don't think, I know that's where it all started, because I was in J school from 2000 to 2002, and there was a federal election in there. Anyway, long story short, as a class, we were sent to the CBC Regina studios for a filming of a talk show that no longer exists, but it was called Counterspin, hosted by Avi Lewis, kind of a current events. Yeah, a current events talk show. And, they had they had a person from every major political party on the panel, and they were talking about the grain drain, which was an issue at the time where people were just quite literally walking away from their farms with nothing, right? Like thousands of people every year were leaving farming in Saskatchewan, and farms were growing bigger and bigger in order to survive. And I just remember a man standing up. He had brought his son to the show, and he had tears in his eyes as he was pleading with these politicians, saying, once all of my bills are paid, I have $9,000 to live on for the year. My wife is about to leave me. Like, how can I possibly tell my son that this is a viable and worthwhile career? And it was sort of an aha moment. And I remember going home and talking to my dad about it. I called him up. I'm like, we got to do something. We got to save the farmers. And he's like, don't worry, there will always be farmers, but that wasn't a good enough answer for me. And so after that, I enrolled in agricultural journalism at U of R. And so really kind of focused professionally on farm writing and writing about agriculture, and came back to Ontario with the goal of getting a job at a daily newspaper writing about agriculture, which is what I did. Started out at a small daily in Simcoe, Ontario, which was a fascinating area, and then moved to Niagara, which was an even more fascinating area. And so it just kind of morphed from there. And in 2007, when the 100-mile diet was, all the rage, I was put on assignment to see if it was possible to do that in Niagara. And that's when my focus shifted more toward food. I still love agriculture writing, but do much less of it now, though I still froth at the mouth for a really good ag story. So
agriculture is food, so
that's right. It all starts on the farm, right? So I wouldn't have anything to write about if there weren't farmers. That's exactly. For sure. So
yeah. That's interesting. Did you actually do the 100-mile diet, or did you?
I did.
Oh, did you? How did it go?
And terribly at the time. I remember my editor coming over to me halfway through, very concerned, asking me to abandon the project because I had lost weight. I was a vegetarian. I still am, and there just weren't a lot of options at the time for protein beyond eggs and a very rare cheese that I could score. And it was just tough, and I was driving everywhere. Like, I would spend my days at the office, and at night I would be crisscrossing the peninsula, quite literally, in search of my next meal. Things are so much different now. Now I think it would be very easy to do if you wanted to, and if you weren't somebody who drank coffee or enjoyed the odd exotic indulgence, you could very easily do it. But at the time, no, it was terrible. It really was terrible. But I learned a lot about who was doing what in the region at the time, and that just kind of kept me in the know and in the loop.
I was just going to say that must have given you a really good grounding in the Niagara food scene, just by doing that particular project. And you have really, that's what you've really niched down on the last few years is your Twitter handle and even your blog for a period of time was known as Eating Niagara. You've written a book on on food in the Niagara region, and I mean it's an incredible producing region to begin with, but you've also really dived down, like I said earlier, into the stories of the people who actually produce the food, whether they're farmers, growers, chefs, artisanal producers.
Yeah.
You've really gotten into telling their stories, and that's my favorite writing to read of yours. And
Thank you.
What and I'm going to ask you this as a very selfish question on my end, because I think you and I are very similar in the sense that we are both, I think it would be safe to say we're both fairly introverted and maybe a little bit shy. And you, for me, doing podcast interviews is one of the hardest things of anything I do. They strike fear into me, even when I know the person. But doing a cold interview with somebody I've never met before or spoken to is so stressful for me. And I've really come to appreciate what a skill interviewing is. Like when I see somebody who does it well, I'm just like, wow, like that is a skill, and I can really appreciate it, how effortless they make it now. But how did you get comfortable with interviewing? Because you do that all day long, and or are you comfortable with it? Does it still make you a little nervous, or is it just something that you've gotten better at over time, or how did it work?
Oh gosh, so I just remember my interviewing professor at journalism school was one of the toughest professors I've ever had, and and I was just like, so starting out and in my early days, I was always nervous about it, right? Because so many of my assignments in J school were come up with 3 questions. You only have 3 questions, and you better get it right, and you better get to the heart of the issue in 3 questions, right? and I'm just like, oh my God, like that's not a lot of questions, right? And so I was always nervous early on in my reporting career that I had forgotten something, right? Or, people, I only have 3 questions. I got to get this right. And then I think it's like with anything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get doing it. And obviously researching beforehand always helps, but I have gone into plenty of interviews cold just by circumstance and nature of the job. But yeah, I think with practice, you just kind of get more at ease with it. I also feel like my notebook, when I have my notebook in my hand, I feel like that's my superpower, right? It's almost like putting on a uniform, and it just sort of, kind of changes everything. And I just go and I do it, right? And that helps. I know that sounds a bit silly maybe and far-fetched, but it's true. There's just something that happens when I am holding a notebook and taking notes and actively listening to somebody who's speaking. But yeah, it all comes down to practice and just doing it repeatedly over and over and over again.
Yeah, I definitely do feel more at ease the more that I've done it, but I still feel like I have an awful long way to go. And the notebook as a superpower, I completely get that. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I mentioned recently in an episode that I did drama all the way through high school, and it was one of the best things I could have done from a skill that I use as an adult that I learned in high school. And
yeah, I bet.
It is. It's such an underrated, it's kind of always viewed as an easy course or something you do just to fill the time slot or whatever, unless you're really into theater. And but honestly, it gives you skills that are so important later in life. But one of the skills it has given me is that I find it very easy to get up on a stage, and I don't know what it is. It's literally like a light switch flicks. Like I'm able to kind of like You
Yeah.
know, in like an action movie when they're running through all the quarters, I'm thinking of like Star Wars, and those sliding doors come slamming down all around them, trying to trap them in. And I
Yep.
feel like when I get up on a stage, like all these sliding doors slam down on all the other parts of who I am, and I'm just able to channel the person that needs to be on the stage saying whatever I need to say. And it's a really weird sensation, but I get it. Like it's I
Yeah.
think it sounds very similar to your notebook.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. That's really really interesting. Yeah, the focus and almost the tunnel vision that certain situations can give you, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's like a
yeah.
different Melissa gets up there. It's not the anxiety ridden, freaked
Hmm.
out Melissa.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so have you ever thought about going back and not going back, but have you ever thought about sitting down and writing fiction again?
I have pretty much my entire adult life, right? I have taken steps toward it. I have a novel that I started about 15 years ago that remains unfinished. It's something that still comes to me that I would like to do. I have another idea for a novel, very different from the first one. It's finding the time. It's finding the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I almost sort of feel like when I was working a corporate job, mind you, I also wasn't a parent at that time, but I had more time to do that stuff, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I started my book. I mean, I found out I was pregnant just after I signed the contract, so it was a race against the belly to get that thing written. But I do sort of it's really making the time to do it. But it is a goal. It's a dream for sure.
So let's get into that a little bit more in terms of how you earn your living, because
Mhm.
you do a lot of different things. They all tend to be, but not most, but not all, I think, tend to be in the food sphere. But you you had a corporate job for a while.
Mhm.
You were in, I believe, communications for a university in Ontario. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So after I left the newsroom, I worked in corporate communications first for the city of St. Catharines, and then I moved to Brock University, which is the university here in St. Catharines where I live. And yeah, I mean, it was they were great jobs, and in the grand scheme of things, I think most people would consider them lottery wins, and in a
Mm.
lot of respects they were, but I just never found them as fulfilling as working in a newsroom. And so um, when I was writing my book, that was while I was still at Brock. And then, I found out I was pregnant. And then on my maternity leave, that's when my book came out. And I had also just started writing my freelance food column for the daily papers here in Niagara again. And I just sort of realized, this was what I loved to do. It just reignited my creative spirit and my joy, and it felt like important work to
Mm-hmm.
me. Um, I mean, I've always felt like you don't have to reach a big audience to have big impact, but I felt like, food was something that had a broad appeal, and because we all eat. I mean, we all eat very differently, and food is very political. I don't want to romanticize or overgeneralize in any way, but to me, it felt like it just felt like much more meaningful work than what I had been doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, so with having the mat leave time, and feeling like I wanted to have time with my daughter, and not being comfortable with sending her off to daycare for somebody else to raise 8 hours a day while I worked and only had limited time with her, I thought freelancing would be the way to go. I had also honed a lot of contacts over my years in Niagara, so I was feeling pretty comfortable that I could make the leap and make a living at it as well.
Did you think that you would stay strictly at journalism? Because this is around the time where journalism, well, not journalism, but newspapers started to change pretty dramatically in terms of how people were consuming them. And so did you try straight out to stick to journalism? Because I know you have since branched out and you do all kinds of freelance writing at this point.
Yeah. So that really was my hope, to divide my time between food journalism and my blog as well. So at the same time, I think my very first paid writing gig outside of my regular column and the occasional story for Edible Toronto was actually doing communications work for our local Chamber of Commerce. So I've always kind of maintained that my communications work supports my journalism habit, because, to be honest, freelance journalism doesn't pay the greatest. It can pay okay, but it's not the greatest paying gig, and so yeah, that's why I still do some communications work, but it's for things that I do believe in and get excited about, like agricultural communications or post-secondary, a lot of research writing for post-secondary, which I find fascinating, the work that gets done. So it is stuff that I do enjoy doing, for sure.
So let's talk about what's and I ask this as a freelancer, and I know that there is no typical answer, but what would a typical day be like for freelance writer Tiffany?
Yeah, so typically it's, waking up between 5:30 and 6. I on a personal level, I do my morning routine. I, drink a glass of water. I do a morning meditation. And then I come into my office and I look at my calendar, and I look at my calendar the night before, but I look at it again. I start to kind of chip away at some of the smaller kind of administrative stuff with email, maybe do some editing work. I am studying digital marketing at McMaster University right now. So a lot of mornings this fall have been spent doing schoolwork. It's kind of setting myself up for the day and getting some of the smaller time-sucking tasks out of the way. And then in the morning, ideally, that is when I like to do my interviews, because I'm just more in that frame of mind. And then in the afternoon, it's sitting down to write. I find that's when I'm in that frame of mind. But it doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes I have to write in the morning and do my interviews in the afternoon. But that's sort of the shape of the day that I strive for. I try not to work in the evenings, but it's hard depending on my project schedule and workload at the moment. I try not to work on the weekends, but that's also challenging sometimes as well.
You have a young daughter as well, so
yes,
you want to spend time with her as well.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I do try to limit the time during. I do try to limit my work day, so I'm not always on, because it's very easy to be always on and always working. So.
Yes, it is. And maybe that is our segue into talking about all the pitfalls of freelancing.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start off big here. What for you do you think is the biggest mistake you've made as a freelancer? Like, if there's one thing you look back on and go, oh man, I wish I had done that differently, what would it be?
Yeah, it's funny because I've thought about that a lot leading up to this, right? And I just want to say that when I made the leap, like I was set up quite well, in the sense that I didn't have any debt. I was ready to go. Like, the world was a good place, right? And then it just all went downhill from there. So I think, though, the overarching theme for my biggest mistake is saying yes to everything, which some people will tell you to do, but I would say don't do it. And then accepting the first offer when it comes to payment, and maybe thinking or feeling like you can't negotiate for a higher price because you're going to lose the gig, and keeping the gig is more important to you than you're focusing too much on the short-term gain versus the long-term. So I would have to say is the overarching theme to my failure story. So,
oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really tough because when you start out, it's all mindset. This is all mindset stuff, and it's stuff that we all deal with when we're starting out. There is, I think very often we're operating from a scarcity mindset when we start out because we don't know any better. And we think that if we say no to something that doesn't feel right, what happens if nobody else shows up with a gig? And yeah, we go with, not to say that everybody who approaches you lowballs you, because that's not true, but there is this fear that if we negotiate, we'll lose the job, and and that, I don't know, maybe people will talk about us and say, oh, Tiffany, she's so expensive, you don't want to work with her, or something like that, and word will get around that we're difficult or we're too pricey, or and all of these thoughts go through our heads, because the first few years that you freelance usually are the lean years. Those are the you have to get yourself out there as you need people to know that you're out there and that you're available, and that you're open for business.
No, absolutely. And I just want to go back to something you said, the scarcity mindset. The scarcity mindset is something that I fight every day, now, 6 years into this, and making a decent, like totally livable annual income. And that is something that that is my work. That is my work every day, is fighting that scarcity mindset, for sure. It's very easy to fall into as a freelancer, for sure.
Absolutely. I don't know what it is about us that we feel that we're not worthy of a decent income. I don't know why this is such a, and I don't think any of us would say that out loud necessarily, because when you say it out loud, it sounds really silly. Like, of course I'm deserving of a decent income. But
I think for me, that attitude stems back to my newsroom days, because I had in one job, I had an editor who was constantly reminding us how privileged we were to have the roles that we do. And you are, as a journalist, in a sense. I mean, you often know things before anybody else does, and you have access to information and people that other people, the average person off the street can't just call up and have a conversation with, right? So there are certain things, but I think because of the time when I graduated too, in 2002, and convergence was the big buzzword, and knowing newsrooms were shrinking, and knowing that every community college and a good handful of reputable universities were turning out classes of journalism graduates every year, it was knowing, like, okay, if I don't accept this, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm also going to be replaced within 5 seconds, right? Like, it's being trained to know that you are replaceable, as opposed to being trained to know, like, you are here because you have this skill and that skill, and you add value to the product, right? I think for me, that's where a lot of it stems from, is that, what, if I don't take this job, someone else will, and like you said, word is going to get out that I'm difficult, or I expect to get paid too much, or whatever, right? And just sort of that feeling of, well, work will get more work, so I might as well just take it. So,
and I think so many companies, a lot of us, when we graduate in what I would call a creative services field, so that could be writing, it could be design, it could be journalism, it could be photography, or even marketing, I would put in there. We get our first corporate type job. And it is basically drilled in our head from the moment we arrive that there's people waiting to take your job if you don't want it. And it happens all the time. And it's, some of the companies, you know, my business partner, he worked for a company that literally people would, if he had left, there would be a string of people waiting for his job. It was a very prestigious job, but it didn't pay well.
Yeah.
But the prestige, like if you think back to like The Devil Wears Prada,
Yes.
where
Yes.
she put up with that job, even though she was treated horribly, because she knew that when she left, she could go anywhere because she had stuck out that full year doing that awful job. And there was the prestige of working for that magazine and everything that went with us. And I think a lot of us are really, that's kind of drilled into our heads. Like there's somebody just as good as you who would jump at the chance. And it takes a while before we have the confidence to say, you know what, let them jump. I've got the skills and the confidence now to move on to something better. But when you start out as a freelancer, I think you kind of go back into that mindset. You kind of revert back and start thinking like, oh, maybe somebody else will grab this gig if I don't take it. And yes, somebody will, but it doesn't mean that we should have to settle for less than we're worth.
I agree. I agree with that. Very, very much so, right? I mean, if you say no to a gig, it doesn't mean you're saying no to everything, right? Very true. It's just one gig. And, you know, if you have to, you know, put yourself out there and pitch a little harder to fill the gap, then so be it, because there's a lot to be gained from doing that as well. So, I mean, that kind of goes back to what I was saying from the beginning about one of my mistakes has been saying yes to everything. And, you know, you hear that advice a lot, you know, for a certain amount of time, doesn't matter what you're doing, you know, but say yes to everything, you know, because you never know, you might find like the right niche experience, insert blank, or, you know, fill in the blank here, right? Like whatever it is that you're seeking. And I think that you need to, like, you know who you are, you know what you want to do. So don't take an advertorial gig about a foot care place when you know that you want to be writing about food. And you know, that's something that I did. And while I appreciate, this is again focusing too much on the short term, while I appreciate the paycheck that brought me, you know, in between, you know, some of those food writing jobs, or in between some of the bigger projects, it really didn't do anything else for me. And in hindsight, that's time that I wish I had spent on my blog. That's time that I wish I had spent, you know, more on getting out and exploring something related to food, and that could be turned into a pitch for a story that you know, for a publication that I had never written for before, you know, or something like that. So again, you know, don't say yes to everything. Truly, don't say yes to everything.
I think the one place where maybe saying yes to things that could help you is if you don't know where it is you want to go. And sometimes saying yes to those jobs, and that's what lets you realize that, yeah, you know what, I don't want to write about foot care centers in the local strip mall. That's not my thing. But for the most part, I think, and this kind of goes into one of my biggest mistakes, is we all have a red flag-o-meter in our internal psyche. You know, we all have those gigs where the red flag just goes off and we don't necessarily listen to it because we're in that I gotta say yes mindset. And I think that is definitely one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on, and I still make it from time to time now.
Me too.
Certainly not as frequently as I did when I started out, but those red flags go off for a reason. Even if you can't pinpoint the reason, something is not vibing right with you and is not sitting well with your brain. And whether you can figure out what it is or not, you need to listen to those red flags.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Can I share a story of a
Absolutely,
recent
yes,
red
go
flag?
ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And for the most part, like I've been good at listening to those red flags. Like the foot care center was not a red flag for me. That was just short-sightedness,
Right.
right? Because the person I was working with was like wonderful at his job and I learned a ton from him, but you know, it was just short-sightedness as far as here was my goal and I was kind of going off track with it. But recently I was approached about a gig that was everything that I have wanted as a food writer. It was working with a destination marketing organization to tell the food story of the region in which I live, and it just it's like the opportunity that I've kind of been waiting for my entire freelance career, right? Like I have the institutional history of Niagara's food scene to be able to do this. I have the contacts. It was everything that I wanted. And yet from the very first meeting with this group and to hammering out timetables and my payment and kind of really almost feeling in the end like it was a nickel and diming situation and sort of feeling like this is a really big definitive project, not just for me but for this organization, right? And feeling like it was a fight to get paid what my work was worth, but what the whole project was worth to this organization, right? And I also like there were issues with their treatment of me when it came to my time and my availability and scheduling, and none of it, like the whole time from that initial conversation to my final email to them where I had to decline the first day of the project, the first day of working on the project, because I had been left in limbo for so long that I had made arrangements that day for other gigs, thinking this wasn't working out or happening, right? Like it just, none of it felt right for me. And it's just really interesting because that was the job,
It was the dream
the
gig.
story,
Yeah.
the gig, the dream gig. And it was actually a nightmare. It really was. So, and this had been an organization I worked with before and had a pretty good relationship with. But yeah, that was problematic. So yeah, I mean, even what you think is like the dream gig,
Yeah.
listen to your gut on those two because it might not be.
Oh, it's very true. And sometimes it can be really hard to figure out where that inner warning system is coming from, because one of my absolute worst nightmare situations, I was very new to freelancing, and I said yes to a project that it just felt off, but the person involved who was heading it up was just such a lovely human being. And I just thought, oh, it'll be fine. She's so nice, and the project was interesting, and it had many, and I knew I could do a good job on it. I think that was another thing. Like I knew it was just the niche that it was in was just something that I was really into, and I just thought I can do this. But there was just something that just didn't sit right, and I think I was too inexperienced at the time to put my finger on it, but it became a horrendous project. It went on for over a year. It should have been a 6-week project, and it went on for a year, and I finally had to fire the client, which I had never done before. And the firing situation did not go well.
Oh no.
No, she did not handle it well, and she told several other people about it. And I had a client who actually let me go because of it, because they had heard her side of it. And and it was awful, just awful all around. But the thing was, after I fired her, even though it turned into a very messy situation, the relief of having that off my shoulders was huge. Like, I didn't even care that I lost the other client, because I was just like, it doesn't matter, because I can put this to bed now. It's done. And now I wouldn't take that project. I looking back on it, I can see exactly what the problems were, and at the time I was just too inexperienced. But it really did teach me that if you have that feeling, you need to proceed with extreme caution. Even if you can't figure out why. So you said something there, though, that was really interesting, in that the company that you were, the organization you were working with, wasn't seeing what the project was worth to them, or wasn't valuing it to what it was worth to them. And I think this is another mistake we make as freelancers, in that when you're a freelancer and you're trying to set your rates, like that's just one of the hardest things you're going to do.
Absolutely. Yes, that is hands down the toughest part of the job, right?
Absolutely. And it's something you have to revisit all the time, so it never goes away. But one of the things I think we tend to forget when we're pricing our work is we think about what we need in order to consider it a good return on the investment. But we often forget about what our work is going to be worth to the organization, what the value we're bringing to them in terms of what their return on investment is going to be. And I think that's a mistake a lot of us make when we're pricing ourselves, is we don't think about the value we're bringing. And I don't know if that's something, obviously that's something that has come into your head because you just mentioned it there, but I think that's a big mistake we make.
Yeah. And this was really the first time that had happened, where that light bulb went off for me, because they came to me specifically because they knew what I could bring to the table in terms of my skills and my knowledge, right? And this was a project that, quite honestly, nobody in the region had really ever done before, or at least not recently. Like, it needed updating, and it might have been done piecemeal, but like, the potential for this project and the importance of this project, like, it can't be understated, and especially for this particular organization and what it does, and how it could really set itself apart from the competition out there, and I felt like because, and maybe it was because of the nature of the relationship I had had with them before, where I was writing stuff, and for whatever reason, they would always take my byline off. And I think it's because they treated my work like marketing content as opposed to storytelling. So, because it was supposed to sort of be the every voice as opposed to somebody's voice, that's why it came off. But now they wanted me and my voice, because they saw me and my voice as having authority. But yeah, it was very clear that they really, that I don't think they actually really did value what the project could ultimately mean and bring to them in the long run. And it was really actually empowering for me to go through this process of breaking up with this client, because it was really sort of one of the few times that I've set boundaries when it came to, like, you have to respect my time here. Like, you can't just expect me to be available to you on short notice, or go like weeks at a time without communicating with me and keeping me updated on things, and then just expecting me to drop everything and be there, right? So, and again, the fact that they were treating it like that too also showed to me that they weren't grasping the importance and magnitude of this project either. So yeah, I think clients definitely need to really sort of sit down And instead of thinking, well, we can just find somebody else, you know, or we can do X, Y, Z instead. I think they really need to sit down before they even reach out to somebody to do the work, to determine, like, how important is this to us? Like, what does it mean to us to have this? And if it doesn't work out with this person, or you know, really kind of go through that process, because I do feel like there is a certain attitude that because there are so many freelancers out there that we're expendable, and we should be grateful that they're coming to us when we need to be auditioning clients as much as they need to be auditioning, as much as our clients need to be auditioning us.
Yes. Do you think this is going to change how you, this experience you had recently is going to change how you pitch in the future and how you have those conversations with potential clients who come to you with projects?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, since then, I have really worked hard at trying to streamline my work and my projects, and kind of what I'm taking on. So I really now want to be doing fewer things, like taking on fewer smaller projects and focusing more on bigger projects, and longer term projects, and more meaningful projects, whether it is related to food or something else. Like it's definitely shown me that I can say no to something and I can still have a job the next day. I can still be bringing in income, and I can still establish and set those boundaries and know that if that particular organization or client doesn't like it, someone's going to be okay with it, because that's just how they work, right? And yeah, so it was very empowering to go through that exercise, and I know that I live another day as a freelancer.
That's one of the things after doing this for, oh gosh, I think it's about 12 years now, is that I have come to trust that there's always another gig. There always is. I've really found that as soon as a hole opens up, something usually comes along to fill it. And that's really hard to trust when you're starting out. But it really does happen. And I think the other thing that I have kind of learned from being in similar situations, and I did a ton of work on my pricing this year because I knew I was just priced way too low. But I also realized that, the work I do does bring value. And I actually completely changed my rate cards this year to actually focus on the value that I'm bringing, to justify why you should pay me this, why I'm worth this, because I am worth it. And it was so hard. It was one of the biggest things, the hardest things I've done in recent years, because I really do struggle with undervaluing my work.
Yeah, me too.
I think most freelancers do. It really takes a lot of confidence to be able to stand up and say, yes, I'm worth this, and here's why I'm worth this. And I realized this year, like, I have to focus on showing people why I'm worth it. Like, yes, maybe you're paying me a little bit more than you would pay somebody else, but here's what you're going to get and why it's going to be worth it. So I would say that's something, if you're new to freelancing, to really focus on when you're doing your pricing, is focus on the value that you're bringing. What you're doing might come really easily to you, but that doesn't mean you should be paid pennies for it just because it's easy. Because it's not easy to the person that's hiring you. That's why they're hiring you. And so you have to think about the value you're bringing to them, and you have to be able to communicate that to them in. And I think that's a thing where we do tend to stumble, is because we do the things. You write because you love to write. I design because I love to design. Like, we're doing this because we love it. And when you love something and you're passionate about it and you've been doing it for a while, it is easy, I'm putting that in quotation marks, for you. Like, you would do it for free. Like, if you were financially independent, you'd still do this but you'd do it for free because you didn't need the money. And so I think we tend to undervalue ourselves because we do love what we're doing. And there's so many times where I'm looking at something that somebody's got on their website or an ebook that they've done, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, their content is amazing, but they're not presenting it well. I just want to fix it for them. Like I want to fix it for them, and I don't even care if they pay me, because I want what they're putting out there to be beautiful, because they deserve for it to be beautiful. And so I find myself falling into that trap all the time of not charging enough because I just want to make it better for them.
Yeah. No, I think that's that's been an issue for me. Like the not charging enough kind of comes from, those early days of freelancing as well, where it was like, oh, I would really love to do this. And so I'm just going to say yes and do it as well. I mean, and aside from the fear of negotiating and what that could lead to, right? It's because I do believe that sometimes it's okay to take the gig that maybe you're not getting paid the greatest at if it can lead to other opportunities, but they don't always either. No. And so it's a gamble, right? But the problem is then if you fall into the trap of always saying yes to that stuff, then again, it goes back to like my foot care story. It starts to take up time from you really getting to where you want to be and where you need to be, and maybe pitching the bigger, better paying project or pursuing the client that has those projects, right? So yeah, it's a bit of a vicious cycle in some ways too, but yeah, you kind of have to get yourself off that hamster wheel. So if you are going to say yes to certain things like that, again, just have clear boundaries about it, so you're not constantly saying yes to that stuff and then either struggling to make ends meet or using up all your time for this stuff that really does mean something to you and can get you to where you want to be.
Yeah, I think that's something to think about. There are times where it is okay to work for free or to work for less than you would, because you can see a bigger return down the road. It's like an investment in your future. Those don't always work out, like you mentioned, and there are people out there who will take advantage of that. We've all been approached with like, oh, but think of the exposure you'll get. And, you have to be very wary when anybody says that to you. But there are times where, and I think particularly maybe if it's a project you feel very passionate about, where you will put in the work and you may not see the return for years. I can think of a very specific project in my other business that we literally chipped away at the client for, I think it was 5 years, where we invited them to come to events. We communicated with them regularly. We did small things for them in the hopes that it would lead to something bigger. And it took 5 years, but it led to one of the biggest contracts we ever landed. And we just, again, it was that gut feeling, like we just felt like this is worth it. This and we knew it wasn't going to be a quick payoff. And so there are times where that does work out, but you do have to be careful with those, and you can't have those as all your projects, right? You can have one or two that you're nurturing, but at the end of the day, you need those projects that pay your bills this month.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely finding the balance, for sure.
Yeah. You also mentioned boundaries there, and I think that's something that when we first start out as freelancers, we are not good at. Not necessarily because we don't want to have boundaries or anything, but I think it takes a little while sometimes for us to figure out what our boundaries are or what we want them to be. And that comes more with experience, but it is definitely, as soon as you realize something should be a boundary, you need to implement it.
Yes, absolutely. Boundaries have been one of my biggest challenges and failures as well. And I think that's why, you'll often, pre-pandemic anyway, you'd often see me at at Starbucks on a Saturday afternoon, you know, trying to get a story done because, you know, I took on the last minute client who needed something turned around quickly, or a client got me stuff late and then it had the domino effect of running into other deadlines. And so now I'm running to, and so now I'm running to catch up. Right. Yeah. And now I'm missing time with my family, with my daughter, who was my whole raison d'etre for freelancing in the first place. Yes. Right. And so, yeah, it's being able to say to somebody, you know, without having to say a hard no, but just saying, hey, listen, you know, this is my situation. Realistically, this is when I can do this for you because, you know, I have other people ahead of you and they're counting on me too, you know, and it's respecting your time, but it's also respecting your client too, because you can race to get something done, and you know, sometimes done is better than perfect, but if you do want to do a good job and you do want returning clients too, I think, you know, allowing yourself the proper time that you need to do something well, and that is also, you know, worth the price that you're charging too, right? Like it's one thing to know your worth and charge that, but then we also do have to deliver that worth too. So absolutely, boundaries are hugely important. You're right. If you feel like it needs to be established from the get-go, or something comes up or you feel like this is a boundary issue, deal with it right then and there.
Yeah, and put it in place for future projects. Work your boundaries into your contracts, and maybe that's where we'll kind of wrap things up. The other mistake I think a lot of new freelancers make, and even some seasoned ones, is don't be afraid to hire a good accountant and a good lawyer when you need them. Yes. Your contracts are the basis of your business, and if you have boundaries, put them in your contracts and have consequences if the boundaries are broken. And you know, make sure that that's where a lawyer can help you. They can help you with a boilerplate contract that that incorporates all these things that you want the client to be aware of, like I'm not available on weekends, or if you don't get the content or the things that I need to meet by this date, please recognize that it is going to push your project back by a week or however long, and have those things all written down in black and white so you can point back to them and communicate them to the client when you're signing the contract. Let them know, like, these are the things that you need to be aware of, and make sure that they acknowledge them and that they understand that. And when you're starting out, very few of us do that. I certainly didn't.
No, I didn't either. It's true. Again, I think it goes back to, like, you're auditioning the client just as much as they're auditioning you too. So, and that's great advice for sure.
Yeah, get that stuff in a contract. It makes things so much easier. It's in black and white. It's easier to have the conversation when they've acknowledged that it's there. And the same with an accountant. Just when you're starting out, and I know when we're starting out, we tend to think that these are expensive luxuries, but they're really financial necessities. And Heather and I spoke about this in a previous episode quite recently. I'll link to it in the show notes, about, are you ready to quit your day job, and how important it is to, because we've all made mistakes that could have been avoided if we had just sat down for an hour with an accountant before we dove into freelance.
Yeah. Just quickly, that's been another big failing of mine too. I mean, I started out freelancing with no debt, and I have had periods where I have gotten into debt with it, and that's because I didn't sit down with an accountant. And one of the biggest mistakes I made was miscalculating what I was going to owe on my taxes, because
Ooh, yeah.
early in my freelancing, when I had those lean years, it was manageable, but then all of a sudden I went from one really lean year to one really incredible year, and didn't end up setting aside enough, and got walloped with this tax bill. And I was just like, oh my goodness. And it took forever to dig myself out of that, because then it was, not only having to pay that down, but then save and set aside the right amount for
the following year.
The following year. So definitely having those conversations, going in, eyes wide open. Like, I've reframed that with, yeah, but I had a really great year and my business is doing well. And that's what makes it easier to swallow. But at the time, it's just like, ouch. So definitely going in eyes wide open about that stuff, and how much to set aside each month, especially when you notice that you are starting to bring in more money, right? It's incredible.
And that's where, if you sit down with your accountant every year and just have a State of the Union kind of conversation, they can help you adjust what you set aside. And the minute that you start to notice that, hey, you know what, I'm not going to make 20 grand this year, I'm going to make 60 grand. Like, pick up the phone and call your accountant and say, hey, look, I am going to make a lot more money than I did last year. I've got the contract signed. Like, what do I need to do? And they have tables and things that they can just look up how much you need to set aside, and they'll tell you. And you are not the only person I know to make that mistake. It's so common, particularly, as you said, when you start out and things are lean, and you don't, if you are not sort of hitting that 30K threshold your first year out, you're probably not going to have to worry too much about taxes. But if you go from having a really lean year to having a really good year, it can change your tax situation dramatically.
Yes, it does. It does. Trust me, it does.
And you can get caught off guard. And Heather was very upfront in that episode that she had been in a similar situation. She completely miscalculated her taxes. And there have been other guests on this podcast who I know have done the same thing. It's a very common mistake, and it can be a very costly mistake. And it's something that when you're employed by somebody, you don't have to think about, because they take care of it for you. But when you freelance, it's on you. And the government, the government is always the first person to get their money. So
yes, exactly. April 30th comes and you are paying that bill whether you like it or not.
That's right. You need to go take a loan out, but you're paying your tax bill.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. Well, thank you, Tiffany. This was a really great chat today. And I think we talked about a lot of things that we've both experienced, and that definitely need to be on the radar if you're a new freelancer. But I'm pretty sure that even if you're a seasoned freelancer, you can certainly relate to some of the mindset issues and the pricing issues, because those are things that just keep coming. They don't ever really go away, no matter how experienced you are.
It's true. It's true. Know your value, people, not just in dollars and cents, just know your value overall.
Absolutely. And listen for those red flags when they come. So, Tiffany, before we sign off, where can people find you, and what have you got going on next?
So right now I am on social media at Eating Niagara on most of the major channels. I'm currently working on a new website. I don't have my blog anymore, so I'm currently chipping away at a portfolio site. It's tiffanymayer.com, but if you go there right now, there's not a lot there, but stay tuned. And those are sort of, and launching a newsletter actually at the end of the first quarter next year. Those are kind of my big projects right now. So
fantastic. So we'll put show notes. We'll put links to all of those in the show notes, and so you can find Tiffany. And I do recommend following her. She's very active on Instagram. And are you still active on Twitter? You used to be quite.
Yeah, I'm getting active again. It's funny, with the pandemic, my social media sharing just slowed right down. but I do enjoy Twitter, and I do enjoy Instagram, frustrations with the algorithm aside. So those are sort of the two places where I'm most active. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm learning to appreciate LinkedIn as well. So
it's a good platform as well. But yeah, if you love food and you love the Niagara region, Tiffany is definitely somebody you want to be following, because she tells a lot of great food stories, and she highlights a lot of the incredible producers in that region who feed us. So
thank you. Thanks.
All right, Tiffany, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to all of you for listening this week. And we will be back next week with another new episode. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com, or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.